The creek ran ice-cold even in summer, fed by snowmelt from the high country, and Faye Zimmerman stood knee-deep in it, washing her only spare dress when she heard the crack of branches in the forest behind her. She spun around, heart hammering, clutching the wet fabric to her chest as a figure emerged from the pine trees, a mountain of a man with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun, dark hair falling past his collar, and arms corded with muscle that strained against his worn shirt. "Easy there," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow put her at ease even as her pulse raced. "Did not mean to startle you. Name's Fletcher Sullivan. I have a cabin about a mile upstream." Faye relaxed her grip on the dress slightly, studying him with wary blue eyes. She had been living in the abandoned trapper's shack near Eager, Arizona for 3 weeks now. Ever since the stagecoach, she had been traveling on broken axle, and the driver had left her behind with promises to return that never materialized. The year was 1876, and a woman alone in this wilderness was as vulnerable as a newborn fawn among wolves. "Faye Zimmerman," she replied, lifting her chin despite the disadvantage of standing in the creek with sopping laundry. "I am staying in the old cabin down the way." Fletcher's dark eyes swept over her, taking in her threadbare dress, the hollows beneath her cheekbones, the careful way she held herself. "That shack has not been lived in for 5 years. Roof leaks something terrible." "I have managed," Faye said, though they both knew it was barely true. The roof did leak, and the walls let in wind, and she had been surviving on what little she could forage and the dwindling supplies from her trunk. He nodded slowly, seeming to come to some decision. "Creek is good for washing, but it is too exposed. You should not be out here alone. There are men who pass through these woods who would not be as polite as I am being." "I did not have much choice," Faye said, and hated how her voice wavered. "I need to wash my things." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him thinking, his jaw working beneath the dark stubble. He was perhaps 26 or 27, she guessed, and built like the mountains themselves, all hard planes and solid strength. There was something about the set of his shoulders that spoke of a man who could handle whatever the wilderness threw at him. "I will help you," he said finally. "The cabin you are in is not fit for living. Mine has a solid roof and a good stove. You can stay there until we figure out how to get you back to civilization." Faye stiffened. "I cannot stay in your cabin. That would be improper. More improper than freezing to death when autumn comes." Fletcher asked, and there was no mockery in his tone, only practical concern. "I have a loft. You can sleep up there. I will stay below. There is a bolt on the inside if it makes you feel safer." She wanted to refuse on principle, wanted to maintain the dignity and propriety she had been raised with back in Philadelphia. But the truth was that she was terrified, exhausted, and running out of options. The abandoned shack was barely keeping the elements at bay, and she had no idea how to survive a mountain winter. "Why would you help me?" she asked quietly. Fletcher met her eyes, and there was something achingly honest in his gaze. "Because it is the right thing to do. And because I know what it is like to be alone." 3 days later, Faye moved into Fletcher's cabin with her single trunk and her tattered pride. The cabin was everything he had promised: sturdy logs chinked tight against the wind, a stone fireplace that radiated heat, glass windows with real shutters, and a loft space that was cozy and private. Fletcher had already moved his own bedroll downstairs and installed a simple bolt lock on the loft ladder for her peace of mind. He was gone most days, checking his trap lines and hunting, and Faye found herself settling into an uneasy routine. She cooked the game he brought back, mended his spare clothes in exchange for his hospitality, and tried not to think about how the simple domesticity of it felt both foreign and strangely right. Fletcher was not what she had expected. He moved through the cabin with quiet efficiency, spoke only when he had something worth saying, and treated her with a respectful distance that should have been reassuring, but instead left her oddly disappointed. She found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, the way his muscles flexed when he split wood, the concentration on his face when he cleaned his rifle, the gentleness in his hands when he carved small figures from pine scraps in the evenings. "You make those for trade?" she asked one night, watching him shape what looked like a tiny bear. "No," Fletcher said, not looking up from his work. "Just something to do with my hands. Helps me think." "What do you think about?" He paused then, his knife still against the wood, and looked at her across the firelight. "Lots of things. How to keep the snow from damming up the creek come winter, whether the deer population will hold through hunting season, what a woman from Philadelphia is doing alone on a broken stagecoach in Arizona territory." Faye felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was traveling to California. My aunt lives in Sacramento. She offered me a position as a teacher in her school. Long way from Philadelphia. There was nothing left for me there," Faye said, and was surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. "My parents died of fever 2 years ago. I was living with my uncle, but when he remarried, his new wife made it clear I was not welcome. I had no prospects, no income, and no future. So when my aunt wrote, I took what little I had and bought a ticket west." Fletcher's eyes softened with understanding. "And the stage left you behind?" "The driver said the repairs would take a day, maybe 2. He told me to wait in Eager, but when I went back to where the stage was supposed to be, it was gone. Someone in town said they had seen it leave heading west. No one knew if they would send another or if I should try to catch up." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I had already paid for my passage. I could not afford another ticket, and I had no money to send word to my aunt or to return east even if I wanted to." "So you waited," Fletcher said. "So I waited. I stayed at the boarding house for a week, but my funds ran out. The woman who owned it was kind, but she had her own troubles. She told me about the old trapper's cabin and said I could shelter there if I needed. I thought perhaps I could find work in Eager, earn enough for another ticket, but she broke off, shaking her head. The town is so small. There is no work for a woman alone." Fletcher set down his carving and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You are not alone anymore." The simple statement settled around them like a promise, and Faye felt something shift in her chest. She had been so focused on survival, on maintaining her independence and dignity, that she had not let herself acknowledge how desperately lonely she had been. Not just since the stagecoach abandoned her, but for months before that, years even, living in her uncle's house like a ghost, unwanted and invisible. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything you have done." Fletcher shook his head. "No thanks needed, just glad I found you when I did." Summer deepened into August, and Faye found herself adapting to mountain life in ways she never would have imagined back in Philadelphia. She learned to recognize the edible plants Fletcher pointed out on his trap rounds, learned to tell when game was cooked through, and when it needed more time over the fire, learned the rhythms of the forest and the sky. And she learned about Fletcher Sullivan. He had been living alone in these mountains for 4 years, she discovered, having come west after his family's farm in Missouri was destroyed during the war. His parents and younger sister had died of cholera, and he had simply started walking until he could not walk anymore, ending up in this remote corner of Arizona territory where the pines grew thick and the air was thin and clean. "Why stay?" Faye asked one afternoon as they worked together to preserve berries she had gathered. "Why not go to one of the towns, find work with other people?" Fletcher was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Out here, things make sense. You work hard, you survive. You prepare for winter, you make it through. There is no politics, no lying, no people pretending to be what they are not. Just the mountain and the seasons and what you can do with your own two hands. That sounds lonely, Faye said softly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the loneliness in his eyes even as he said, "It was. Until now." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something Faye could not quite name. She was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way his gaze seemed to see straight through her carefully maintained composure to the yearning underneath. "Faye," he said, his voice rough. "I know you are planning to leave when we can arrange passage to California. I know you have your aunt waiting and a teaching position and a whole life planned out. But I want you to know that if you ever changed your mind, if you ever wanted to stay here," he stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "You would be welcome, more than welcome." Faye's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Fletcher, you do not have to answer now," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know that you have a choice, that you could have a home here if you wanted one." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and turned back to the berries. But her hands were shaking and she could not stop thinking about what he had said. A home. Not just shelter, not just charity, but a real home. With him. It was a dangerous thought, and it took root in her heart like wildflower seeds in fertile soil. The next morning, Faye woke to the sound of heavy splashing outside. She climbed down from the loft and peered out the window, then froze in surprise. Fletcher was waist deep in the creek, heaving stones from the stream bed and arranging them in a careful line across the water. His shirt was off despite the morning chill, and the muscles in his back and shoulders flexed and bunched with each lift. Sweat gleamed on his skin even in the cool air, and Faye felt her breath catch at the raw power in his movements. She pulled a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. "What are you doing?" Fletcher looked up, water streaming from his hair, and there was almost a sheepish quality to his expression. "Building you something." "Well, trying to. Building me what?" He gestured to the stones. "A bathing pool. I have been thinking about how you have to wash in the creek, out in the open where anyone could come by. Thought if I dammed up this section, created a little pool behind the cabin, you could bathe in private. The stones will hold back enough water to make it deep enough for a proper bath, but the creek will still flow over the top and around the sides." Faye stared at him, something warm and overwhelming rising in her chest. "You are building me a bathing pool." "Trying to," Fletcher repeated. "Might take a few days to get all the stones set right, but I figure it is worth doing. You deserve to feel safe and comfortable." She pressed a hand to her mouth, unexpected tears pricking her eyes. No one had ever done something like this for her, something so thoughtful, so practical, so perfectly suited to her needs. It was not flowers or poetry or grand romantic gestures. It was a man seeing what she needed and using his strength and skill to provide it. "Fletcher," she said, her voice breaking, "this is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me." He waded toward the bank, water streaming off his body, and stood before her with an intensity in his dark eyes that made her knees weak. "I would do 100 kind things for you, Faye Zimmerman. 1,000. Whatever it took to make you happy." "Why?" she whispered. "Because somewhere between finding you in that creek and watching you make this cabin into a home, I fell in love with you," Fletcher said, simple and direct as everything about him. "I know I am just a mountain man with nothing to offer but a cabin and some trap lines. I know you are educated and refined and probably meant for better things. But I love you, and I wanted you to know." Faye felt like the earth had shifted beneath her feet. She had suspected, perhaps, that Fletcher felt something for her. Had felt the way his eyes followed her movements, had noticed how he always made sure she had the warmest spot by the fire, had treasured the small kindnesses he showed her daily. But to hear him say it out loud with such raw honesty stripped away every defense she had carefully constructed. "I am not meant for better things," she said, stepping closer to him. "I am meant for real things, true things. And this feels more real and true than anything I have ever known. Faye." Her name was a prayer on his lips. "I do not want to go to California," she said, the truth spilling out of her like water over stones. "I do not want to teach in my aunt's school or live a respectable life in Sacramento. I want to stay here. I want to learn everything you can teach me about surviving in these mountains. I want to make a home with you. I want," she broke off, breathless. "What do you want?" Fletcher asked, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat of his skin, could see the water droplets caught in his eyelashes. "You," Faye said. "I want you." Fletcher's hand came up to cup her face, his palm rough and warm against her cheek. "You have me. You have had me from the moment you looked at me with those fierce blue eyes and told me you had managed." When he kissed her, it was like coming home to a place she had never been, but had somehow always known. His lips were gentle despite his strength, asking rather than demanding, and Faye melted into him with a soft sound of surrender. Her hands found his bare shoulders, marveling at the solid muscle beneath her palms, and Fletcher's arms came around her, lifting her clear off her feet as he deepened the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher set her down gently and rested his forehead against hers. "I will finish your bathing pool," he said. "And then I will ride into Eager and find the circuit preacher. And if you will have me, Faye Zimmerman, I will marry you and spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing a mountain man over civilization." "I could never regret choosing you," Faye said, and kissed him again to prove it. True to his word, Fletcher spent the next 4 days working on the bathing pool. Faye helped when she could, though mostly she watched in admiration as he hauled stone after stone from the creek bed, arranging them in a careful semicircle that would dam the water while still allowing overflow. He dug out the area behind the dam, creating a depression that would hold the water deeper, and lined the bottom with smooth river rocks. When he finally declared it finished, Faye clapped her hands in delight. The pool was perhaps 6 feet across and deep enough that she could sit in it with the water up to her shoulders. The current kept it constantly refreshing, flowing in through gaps between the stones and spilling over the top of the dam, so the water would always be clean and cold. "It is perfect," she said, throwing her arms around his neck. "You are perfect." Fletcher caught her up in his arms, spinning her once before setting her down. "Try it out. Make sure it is what you wanted." Faye blushed. "Now." "I will go check the trap lines," Fletcher said, understanding immediately. "Give you some privacy for your first bath." After he left, Faye undressed beside the pool and lowered herself into the water. It was shockingly cold, fed by the mountain creek, but also invigorating. She could sit comfortably on the smooth stones Fletcher had arranged, and the pool was perfectly positioned behind a stand of pines that screened it from view of the cabin and the woods beyond. She could bathe here without fear of being seen, could wash her hair and her clothes in complete privacy. She tipped her head back and let the water close over her shoulders, feeling tension she had carried for months, years, finally begin to release. This was more than a bathing pool. It was a promise. It was Fletcher saying, with stone and sweat and his own strength, that he saw her, that he valued her comfort and safety, that he would work hard to give her what she needed. She had never been loved like this before, had never even imagined it was possible. Fletcher returned to find her dressed and sitting on a rock beside the pool, combing out her wet hair with her fingers. He sat down beside her, near enough that their shoulders touched, and looked out at his handiwork with satisfaction. "It is good?" he asked. "It is more than good," Faye said. "It is wonderful. Thank you, Fletcher." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rush of water and the whisper of wind through the pines. Finally, Fletcher said, "I will ride to Eager tomorrow, see if I can find Preacher Morris. He travels through this area once a month or so. Might be in town, might have to leave word for him." "How long will you be gone?" Faye asked, trying to keep the anxiety from her voice. "2 days, maybe 3 if I have to wait for the preacher." Fletcher took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Will you be all right here alone?" "I will," Faye said, and was surprised to find it was true. A few weeks ago, the thought of being alone in the wilderness would have terrified her. But Fletcher had taught her so much: how to bar the cabin door properly, how to keep the fire going, how to shoot the old rifle he kept above the hearth. "I will be waiting for you." Fletcher left before dawn the next morning, riding the sturdy mountain horse he kept in a small corral behind the cabin. He had stocked the cabin with extra wood and water, shown Faye where he kept his spare ammunition, and made her promise to stay close to the cabin until he returned. "I will be back as soon as I can," he said, holding her close in the pre-dawn darkness. "And then we will get married, and you will be Faye Sullivan, and everyone will know you are mine." "I am already yours," Faye said. "I have been since you pulled those first stones from the creek." She watched him ride away until he disappeared into the trees, then turned back to the cabin. 2 or 3 days alone. She could manage that. The first day passed quietly. Faye kept herself busy with the familiar tasks of maintaining the cabin, cooking, cleaning, mending. She ventured out to the bathing pool in the afternoon, and spent a luxurious hour soaking in the cold water, watching the play of sunlight through the pine boughs overhead. The second day, she decided to gather more berries from the patches Fletcher had shown her, staying within sight of the cabin as she picked the ripe fruit. She was bent over a particularly laden bush when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Faye's heart jumped into her throat. Fletcher would not be back this soon, and he was only one rider anyway. She crouched lower in the bushes, peering through the leaves at the trail. 2 men rode into view, rough-looking and travel-stained. They were leading a pack mule laden with supplies, and from their conversation, they were trappers heading up into the high country for the season. "Told you there was a cabin around here," one of them said, a lean man with a scar across his cheek. "Belongs to that mountain man, Sullivan. Heard he keeps to himself mostly." "Probably not even here," the other replied, heavier set with a tangled beard. "We could shelter for the night, rest the horses." Faye held her breath, praying they would keep moving. But the men dismounted and approached the cabin, calling out to see if anyone was home. Her mind raced. If she stayed hidden, they would eventually give up and leave, or they would break into the cabin and make themselves comfortable. Either way, they might see signs that a woman was living there, and that could lead to questions she did not want to answer. But if she revealed herself, they might assume she was alone and vulnerable. The decision was taken from her when the lighter of her 2 berry baskets tipped over, spilling fruit across the ground with a soft rustle. Both men turned toward the sound, and Faye had no choice but to stand up slowly, keeping her hands visible. "Hello," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The trapper's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in speculation. The scarred one spoke first. "Did not expect to find a lady way out here. You live in that cabin?" "I do," Faye said, keeping her chin high. "With my husband. He is out checking traps but will be back any moment." It was a gamble, but the lie came smoothly. She saw the men exchange glances, clearly trying to decide if she was telling the truth. "Sullivan's got himself a wife," the bearded one said skeptically. "Funny he never mentioned that when I saw him in town 6 months back." "We have not been married long," Faye improvised. He probably had not met me yet when you saw him." The scarred man took a step closer, and Faye fought the urge to back away. "Pretty thing like you, married to that old bear, Sullivan. That is something." "My husband is neither old nor a bear," Faye said coldly, "and he will not take kindly to strangers frightening me while he is away." "We are not trying to frighten you," the bearded one said, though his smile was not reassuring. "Just looking for a place to rest our horses, maybe fill our canteens. The creek here runs clean." Faye gestured toward the water. "Help yourselves to the creek, but the cabin is private." The men did not move toward the creek. Instead, the scarred one said, "Seems unfriendly, turning away travelers. This is hard country. People usually help each other out." "People usually ask permission before approaching someone's home," Faye countered. Her heart was hammering, but she kept her voice firm. "Take your water and be on your way." She saw the moment the scarred man decided he did not have to listen to her. He started toward the cabin, saying, "I think we will just have a look inside, make sure everything is on the up and up." Faye moved faster than she thought possible, racing ahead of him and blocking the cabin door. "You will not." "Get out of the way, lady," the bearded one said, his tone losing its false friendliness. "We are tired and our horses need rest. Sullivan would not mind us using his cabin for a night." "I mind," Faye said. Her hand found the door handle behind her and she remembered the rifle hanging above the hearth inside. "Leave now, or I will make you leave." The scarred man laughed. "You and what army?" Faye opened the door behind her, slipped inside, and slammed it shut, dropping the heavy bar into place. She heard the men cursing outside and ran for the rifle, checking quickly to make sure it was loaded as Fletcher had taught her. "Open this door," one of them shouted, pounding on the wood. Faye went to the window and opened the shutter just enough to point the rifle barrel through. "Leave now, or I start shooting." There was a moment of shocked silence. Then the bearded one said, "You would not dare." Faye aimed carefully and fired a shot that kicked up dirt 2 feet in front of the men's boots. The crack of the rifle echoed through the clearing, sending birds scattering from the trees. "The next one will not miss," Faye said, already reloading the way Fletcher had shown her. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Get on your horses and ride away." The trappers scrambled backward, shouting curses, and ran for their mounts. Faye kept the rifle trained on them until they disappeared down the trail, the sounds of their horses fading into the distance. Only then did she set the rifle down with trembling hands and sink onto the floor, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her. She had done it. She had protected herself in Fletcher's cabin. But the close call left her shaken and grateful that the men had not decided to press their advantage. She spent the rest of the day and all night barricaded in the cabin, the rifle close at hand, jumping at every sound. When Fletcher finally returned the next morning, riding up the trail with Preacher Morris in tow, she burst out of the cabin and threw herself into his arms with a sob of relief. Hey, what happened?" Fletcher demanded, setting her back gently to look her over for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine. There were men, 2 trappers. They wanted to shelter in the cabin, and I told them no, and they did not want to leave, so I had to fire a warning shot." And the words tumbled out in a rush. Fletcher's face darkened like a thunderstorm. "They tried to force their way in." "I did not let them," Faye said, trying to calm her racing heart. "I remembered everything you taught me. I got the rifle and I fired a warning shot and they left." Fletcher pulled her close again, his whole body rigid with anger and fear. "You could have been hurt." "If they had broken down the door, if they had," he could not finish the sentence. "But they did not," Faye said, clinging to him. "I was safe. I protected our home." "Our home," Fletcher repeated, and some of the tension left his shoulders. He pressed a kiss to her hair. "God, Faye, when I think about what could have happened, it did not." she said firmly. I am fine. We are both fine. And you brought the preacher, Preacher Morris, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes, had dismounted and was tactfully examining the cabin's construction. That I did, he called over. Fletcher here tells me you two are wanting to be married. As soon as possible, Faye said. This very moment, Fletcher agreed. The preacher smiled. Well then, let me get my book and we will make it official. They were married there in the clearing beside the bathing pool, with the creek rushing over stones and the pine trees swaying overhead. Fletcher had no ring to give her, but he took her hands in his and spoke his vows with such fierce sincerity that Faye felt tears streaming down her face. I promise to love you and protect you and work every day to make you happy, he said. I promise to be a good husband and to never give you cause to regret choosing this life with me. I promise to be your partner in all things, Faye replied, her voice shaking with emotion. To stand beside you through whatever comes. To make a home with you here in these mountains. To love you for all my days. When Preacher Morris pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her with a tenderness that stole her breath, then swept her up in his arms and carried her across the threshold of the cabin while the preacher laughed and called blessings after them. That night, after Preacher Morris had departed eager with payment for his services and a basket of venison and preserved berries, Fletcher built up the fire and spread their bedrolls together in front of the hearth. He made love to his wife with gentle reverence, as though she were something precious and breakable, and Faye discovered that strength and tenderness could exist in the same hands, the same heart. Afterward, lying wrapped in Fletcher's arms with the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls, Faye felt a peace she had never known. This rough cabin in the wilderness, this man of few words and quiet strength, this life so far removed from everything she had been raised to want, it was perfect. I love you, she whispered against his chest. I love you too, Fletcher rumbled, his arms tightening around her. My wife. Faye smiled and let herself drift toward sleep, safe and warm and utterly content. The first weeks of marriage brought adjustments and discoveries for both of them. Fletcher, accustomed to years of solitude, had to learn to share his space and his routines. Faye, raised in the structured propriety of Philadelphia society, had to learn the fluid rhythms of mountain life where plans changed with the weather and survival often took precedence over comfort. But they learned together, finding joy in the small intimacies of shared life. Fletcher taught Faye to track deer through the forest, to read the signs of changing weather in the clouds, to set snares for rabbits and cure the hides. Faye taught Fletcher the pleasure of books read aloud by the fire in the evenings, the comfort of a well-organized home, the simple delight of flowers gathered and placed in a jar on the table. She discovered that her husband, for all his rough exterior and sparse speech, had a deeply romantic soul. He carved her a beautiful comb from antler bone, spent 3 days building her a proper washboard when he saw her struggling with laundry, and often left small gifts for her to find a particularly beautiful pine cone, a handful of wildflowers, a smooth river stone worn to perfect roundness. And Fletcher discovered that his wife, for all her city upbringing and delicate appearance, had a core of steel. She did not shy away from hard work, learned quickly and remembered what she was taught, and faced the challenges of mountain life with determination and grace. She also had a quick wit that could make him laugh, a talent for turning their simple meals into something special, and a way of looking at him that made him feel like the luckiest man alive. Summer turned toward autumn, and they worked together to prepare for winter. They harvested and preserved every berry, root, and edible plant they could find. Fletcher hunted deer and elk, and Faye learned to butcher and smoke the meat. They gathered firewood until the stack behind the cabin was taller than Fletcher and deep enough to last through months of snow. One evening in late September, as they worked side by side preparing the last of the berry harvest, Faye said, "I should write to my aunt in California. Let her know I am alive and well and married." Fletcher looked up from the pot he was stirring. "You think she has been worried?" "Probably," Faye said. "The stage company would have told her I never arrived. She has likely been imagining all sorts of terrible fates for me." "Do you regret not going to her?" Fletcher asked quietly. "Not taking that teaching position?" Faye set down the knife she had been using to cut fruit and went to him, framing his face with her hands. "Fletcher Sullivan, I have never regretted a single moment since the day I met you. My aunt's school cannot compare to the life we are building here. I would rather be your wife in a mountain cabin than a respectable teacher in Sacramento." He turned his head to kiss her palm. "I want you to be happy, that is all I want." "I am happy," Faye said firmly. "Happier than I have ever been. But yes, I should write to my aunt. She deserves to know I am well. And perhaps," she hesitated, "perhaps someday we could visit her. When the trapping has been good and we have funds for travel, I would like her to meet you to see that I have chosen well. You want to show me off to your fancy California relations." Fletcher teased, though his eyes were warm. "I want to show everyone that I married the finest man in the territories," Faye corrected. "Strong and kind and good." Fletcher pulled her into his lap, kissing her soundly. "Write your letter. When the first snow comes and the trapping gets good, I will have furs to sell in Eager. I will post it for you then." The first snow came in early October, a light dusting that melted by afternoon but signaled the changing season. Fletcher began running his trap lines in earnest, checking them every few days and bringing back beaver, marten, and fox. The pelts were prime, thick with winter fur, and Faye learned to help him stretch and cure them. The work was messy and difficult, but there was satisfaction in seeing the growing stack of valuable furs. This was their livelihood, the product of Fletcher's skill and hard work that would buy them supplies to see them through the winter and beyond. "Been a good season so far," Fletcher commented one evening as he examined a particularly fine beaver pelt. "Prices should be decent in the spring when I take these to the trading post. Might even have enough to think about improvements to the cabin." "What kind of improvements?" Faye asked, looking around their snug home. "Was thinking about building a proper larder," Fletcher said. "Dug into the hillside to keep things cool, and maybe enlarging the loft, adding a real window up there, make it more comfortable." "The cabin is already comfortable," Faye said, but she was pleased that he was thinking about the future, making plans that included both of them. "Want it to be more than comfortable," Fletcher said, reaching for her hand. "Want it to be a real home. The kind of place where we can raise," he stopped, suddenly looking almost shy. "Raise what?" Faye prompted, her heart beating faster. "Children," Fletcher finished quietly. "Someday, if that is something you want." Faye felt warmth bloom in her chest. She had not let herself think about children yet, too focused on learning to survive in this new life. But the image Fletcher's words conjured little ones running around the cabin, dark-haired children with their father's strength, and their mother's determination was suddenly, achingly appealing. "I would like that," she said softly. "Very much." Fletcher's smile was brilliant, transforming his usually serious face. He pulled her close and kissed her, and when he carried her up to the loft that night, there was a new tenderness in his touch, a sense of possibility and promise. Winter settled over the mountains in earnest by late October. Snow fell almost daily, piling up in deep drifts around the cabin. The temperature dropped until the creek froze except for a small section where the current ran too fast to ice over. The world became a study in white and gray and deep green pine, beautiful and harsh and isolating. But inside the cabin, Faye and Fletcher created their own warmth. They spent long evenings by the fire, Fletcher carving and Faye sewing or reading aloud. They talked about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, the small details of their days. They learned the contours of each other's minds as thoroughly as they had learned each other's bodies. Fletcher made regular trips to check his trap lines, sometimes being gone for a full day when snow made the going slow. Faye hated those days, worrying until she heard his familiar step on the porch, but she never asked him to stop. She understood that the trapping was essential to their survival, and she had married a mountain man, not a town merchant. When he returned from each trip, Fletcher would warm himself by the fire while Faye prepared food, and then they would process whatever he had brought back, skinning, stretching, curing. It was hard work, but there was an intimacy to working side by side, their hands moving in practiced coordination. "You have gotten good at this," Fletcher commented one afternoon as Faye expertly stretched a marten pelt. "Better than I am at some of it." "You are the one who taught me," Faye said, pleased by the compliment. "I just pay attention. You do more than that, you have real skill." He watched her work for a moment, then added, "Never met a woman who took to mountain life the way you have. Most would be complaining about the cold and the isolation." "Most did not have you waiting for them here," Faye said simply. In early November, a massive blizzard swept through, dumping 3 feet of snow and trapping them in the cabin for 5 straight days. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters and finding every tiny gap in the walls. Fletcher kept the fire burning constantly, and they huddled close together beneath every blanket they owned. On the 3rd day, when the storm showed no signs of abating, Fletcher grew quiet and tense. Faye knew he was worried about supplies, about the weight of snow on the roof, about all the things that could go wrong in a storm like this. She did the only thing she could think of to distract him. She started telling him stories from her childhood in Philadelphia. She told him about the grand houses on Chestnut Street, the society parties her mother had taken her to, the strict rules of etiquette that governed every interaction. She made him laugh with tales of pompous suitors and awkward social encounters. And gradually, she felt the tension leave his shoulders as he listened. "Sounds like a different world," Fletcher said when she finished describing a particularly ridiculous dinner party. "Cannot imagine you in all those fancy dresses, making small talk with boring men." "I could not imagine it any more either," Faye said. "That person feels like a stranger now. I'm not sure I would even recognize her." "Do you miss any of it?" Fletcher asked. "The comfort, the society," Faye thought about it honestly. "Sometimes I miss indoor plumbing and bakeries and having more than 3 dresses. But I do not miss the emptiness of that life. All those people, all that activity, and I never felt like I truly mattered to anyone. Here I matter, to you. And that is worth more than all the fancy houses in Philadelphia." Fletcher kissed her temple. "You matter more than anything in this world to me." The storm finally blew itself out on the morning of the 6th day, leaving behind a landscape transformed. Snow covered everything in deep drifts, glittering in the sunshine like diamonds scattered across white velvet. The cabin had held strong, the roof shedding most of the snow, and their supply of wood had been sufficient. Fletcher dug out the door and began the long process of clearing a path to the necessary, to the wood pile, to the creek. Faye helped as much as she could, though the snow was so deep in places that it came up to her waist. They worked together in the bright cold, their breath forming clouds in the air, and Faye was struck by how much she enjoyed even this difficult labor when it was shared with Fletcher. That afternoon, while Fletcher checked the trap lines nearest the cabin, Faye made her way to the bathing pool. Snow had drifted over the top, but beneath it, the pool was still there, the current still flowing. She cleared away the snow and ice at the edges, marveling again at the work Fletcher had put into building this for her. She could not use it now, not with the water so brutally cold and the air freezing, but come spring it would be waiting. The thought made her smile. Come spring, she would bathe here again while the snow melted and the forest came back to life. Come spring, they would have made it through their first winter together. Come spring, she thought with a flutter of hope and nervousness, there might be 3 of them instead of 2. She had suspected for a few weeks now, though she had not said anything to Fletcher yet. Her monthly courses had not come when they should have, and she felt different, more tired than usual, queasy in the mornings, tender in strange places. It was too early to be certain, but deep in her bones, she knew. She was going to have a baby. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. They were so isolated here, so far from doctors or midwives, but women had been having babies in the wilderness since the beginning of time. She was strong and healthy, and Fletcher would take care of her. They would manage, just as they managed everything else. She decided to wait until she was more certain before telling Fletcher. There was no sense worrying him if she was wrong. December brought shorter days and longer nights, and the world seemed to exist in a perpetual twilight. Fletcher's trap lines were producing well, and the pile of furs in the cabin grew steadily. They estimated they had enough to bring a good price when the trading post opened again in the spring. Faye's suspicions about the baby grew stronger as the month progressed. The morning sickness was undeniable now, though she tried to hide it from Fletcher. But he was observant, and one morning when she had to excuse herself quickly from breakfast, he was waiting with a concerned expression when she returned to the cabin. "Are you sick?" he asked, standing up from his chair. "Is it something you ate?" "No, I am fine," Faye started to say, but the lie stuck in her throat. She and Fletcher had always been honest with each other. She did not want to start hiding things now. She took a deep breath and met his worried eyes. "I am not sick. I am with child." For a long moment Fletcher just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he crossed the cabin in 2 long strides to sweep her into his arms. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Faye said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Sometime in the late spring, I think. Are you happy?" "Happy," Fletcher set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "Faye, I do not have words for what I am. Happier than I knew a person could be." He kissed her tenderly, then dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I promise to love you and protect you and teach you everything I know. And I promise to take care of your mother, who is the bravest, strongest woman I have ever met." Faye ran her fingers through his hair, overcome with love for this man who had changed her entire life. "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I am going to try," Fletcher said, standing and pulling her close again. "God, Faye, a baby, our baby." The knowledge changed everything and nothing. Fletcher became even more protective, insisting that Faye rest more and do less heavy work. Faye, feeling healthier once the morning sickness passed after a few weeks, argued that she was pregnant, not fragile, and could still contribute. They compromised, with Faye continuing to help with lighter tasks while Fletcher took on anything strenuous. He became obsessed with preparing for the baby's arrival, carving a cradle from pine wood, setting aside the softest furs for baby blankets, planning how they would child-proof the cabin. "The baby will not be crawling for months after it is born," Faye pointed out with amusement as Fletcher examined the hearth for potential hazards. "I know, but I want to be ready," Fletcher said seriously. "I want everything to be perfect." "It will not be perfect," Faye said gently. Babies are messy and unpredictable, and we have no idea what we are doing, but we will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else. Fletcher pulled her onto his lap, resting his hand over the small swell of her belly. I am scared, he admitted quietly. Of something going wrong, of not being able to protect you both. I am scared too, Faye said, but we cannot let fear rule us. We will be careful and smart, and we will trust that we are strong enough to handle whatever comes. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly with a special meal and small gifts. Faye had knitted Fletcher a warm scarf from yarn she had unraveled from an old shawl and respun. Fletcher had made her a beautiful wooden box with a fitted lid, perfectly sized to hold her few precious possessions: the letters from her aunt, her mother's locket, the ribbon from her wedding bouquet. They talked about what to name the baby, running through options and laughing at the more outlandish ones. If it was a boy, Fletcher liked the name Frank after his father. If it was a girl, Faye had always loved the name Grace. Frank Sullivan or Grace Sullivan, Fletcher said, trying them out. Both sound good to me. We have months to decide, Faye said. No need to commit yet. But privately, she thought Grace would be perfect. Grace for the unexpected blessing this child represented, for the grace that had brought her to Fletcher, for the grace that permeated every moment of the life they were building together. Winter deepened, and Faye's belly grew. By late January, there was no hiding her condition, not that they tried. She felt the baby move for the first time on a snowy afternoon, a flutter like butterfly wings against her insides. She grabbed Fletcher's hand and pressed it to her stomach, and when the baby kicked again, his face lit up with wonder. That is our child, he whispered. Right there. Really real. Very real, Faye agreed, smiling at his awe. As February arrived, they both grew increasingly aware that they needed help preparing for the birth. Fletcher decided to make a trip to Eager to speak with the doctor there and see if he could arrange for a midwife to come stay with them closer to Faye's time. I do not like leaving you, Fletcher said as he prepared for the journey. Especially not now. I will be fine for a few days, Faye assured him. The baby is not due for months yet, and I need you to do this. We need someone who knows about birthing babies. Reluctantly, Fletcher agreed. He left early one morning with a pack full of furs to sell and strict instructions for Faye to stay inside and rest while he was gone. Faye, restless after he left, found herself unable to simply sit idle. She tidied the cabin, reorganized their supplies, and spent time working on the tiny clothes she was sewing for the baby. As evening fell on the second day, she stood at the window watching for Fletcher's return, though she knew he had said he might be gone 3 days. That was when she saw the smoke. It was rising from somewhere to the east, a thick column that stained the sunset sky. Her heart clenched with fear. Fire in the winter was unusual but not impossible: a lightning strike, an unattended campfire. Any number of things could start a blaze even in snow. But the smoke was coming from the direction of Eager. Faye stood at the window until full dark, watching the distant glow and praying that Fletcher was safe, that the town was safe, that this was not the disaster it appeared to be. She barely slept that night, starting awake at every sound, hoping for Fletcher's return. When dawn came gray and cold, she heated water for coffee and tried to calm her racing thoughts. Fletcher appeared just after noon, riding hard and fast up the trail. Faye ran out to meet him despite the cold and saw immediately that something was badly wrong. His face was grim and there was ash in his hair. What happened? She demanded as he swung down from his horse. Fire, Fletcher said, his voice tight. Started in the general store, spread fast. Half the town burned before they got it under control. Oh my God, Faye breathed. Was anyone hurt? 3 dead, including Doc Morrison, Fletcher said, and Faye's heart sank. The doctor had been their best hope for help with the baby. Lots of people hurt, houses burned. It is bad, Faye. Real bad. She threw her arms around him, holding tight. But you are all right. I helped fight the fire until it was out, Fletcher said. Everyone did. But the doc is gone, and there is no midwife in town. The woman who used to help with births moved to Tucson last year. Faye felt panic rising in her throat. What are we going to do? Fletcher pulled back to look at her, his jaw set with determination. We are going to prepare as best we can. I got some books from the doc's office before it burned, medical texts about childbirth. We will study them together. And I will do whatever it takes to keep you and the baby safe. Over the following weeks, they pored over the medical books Fletcher had salvaged. The information was clinical and sometimes frightening, but it was better than going in completely blind. Fletcher read sections aloud, and they discussed what supplies they would need, what could go wrong, how to handle complications. I can do this, Fletcher said one night, though Faye could hear the fear beneath his confidence. I have delivered foals and calves. It cannot be that different. I am not a horse, Faye pointed out, trying to lighten the mood. No, you are much more precious, Fletcher said seriously. Which is why I am going to do everything exactly right. Faye took his hand and squeezed it. We are going to be fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, most of them without doctors. My own grandmother had 9 children in a farmhouse with only her husband to help. We can do this. As winter began its slow retreat towards spring, Faye felt the baby growing stronger and more active inside her. Sometimes she would lie awake at night feeling the movements, marveling at the life they had created. Fletcher would press his hand to her belly and talk to the baby, telling stories about the mountains and the animals and the life waiting here. You are going to love it here, he would say. The whole world is our backyard. I will teach you to track and hunt and read the weather. Your mother will teach you to read and write and think, and we will both teach you to be strong and kind and good. March brought the first hints of thaw, water dripping from icicles, snow melting in patches, the sun growing warmer each day. Fletcher began planning their spring work, clearing new ground for a small garden, repairing winter damage to the cabin and corral, preparing to take the winter's furs to the trading post. Faye's time was growing closer. She could feel it in the way her body was changing, preparing. The baby had dropped lower, and there was a heaviness in her hips that made walking difficult. Fletcher was constantly hovering, ready to help her with everything. You need to calm down, Faye told him one afternoon when he jumped up for the 3rd time to fetch something she could have gotten herself. I am pregnant, not dying. I know, I just want to help, Fletcher said, looking almost hurt. Faye softened, going to him and taking his hands. You do help every day, but you cannot protect me from this. The baby is going to come when it is ready, and all we can do is be as prepared as possible and trust in God and each other. I do trust you, Fletcher said. I just do not trust my ability to, he broke off, shaking his head. To what? Faye prompted. To keep you safe, Fletcher finished quietly. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Faye. If I lost you, you are not going to lose me, Faye said firmly. I am strong and healthy, and this baby is strong too. We are going to be fine. She wished she felt as confident as she sounded. The first pain came on a warm April morning when Faye was hanging laundry outside. She had been feeling odd all day, restless and uncomfortable, with a persistent ache in her lower back. When the contraction hit, it felt like a band tightening around her entire middle, and she had to grip the clothesline to stay upright. When it passed, she stood very still, breathing carefully. That had definitely been a contraction. The baby was coming. She made her way back inside, moving slowly. Fletcher was at the table sharpening his knives, He looked up when she entered and immediately knew something was wrong. "Faye, the baby is coming," she said, trying to sound calm. "That was the first pain just now." Fletcher was on his feet in an instant, his face going pale. "Are you sure? It is not due for another few weeks." "Babies come when they are ready, not when we schedule them," Faye said, managing a shaky smile. "We need to prepare." They moved into action with the efficiency of a well-trained team. Fletcher had everything laid out and ready: clean linens, hot water, the medical books open to the relevant sections, sharp knives sterilized and waiting. He helped Faye into the clean nightgown they had set aside for this purpose, and got her settled on the bed they had brought down from the loft for easier access. The contractions came slowly at first, spaced far apart. Faye walked between them, knowing movement would help, and Fletcher stayed close, offering his arm for support. They timed the pains carefully, watching as they gradually grew closer together and more intense. As afternoon faded into evening, the contractions intensified. Faye found herself gripping Fletcher's hands through each one, breathing through the pain. He talked to her constantly, his voice low and steady, reminding her to breathe, telling her she was doing well, promising that it would be over soon. But soon turned into hours, and hours turned into deep night. The pain became all-consuming, waves that crashed over Faye without mercy. She lost track of time, lost track of everything except breathing through each contraction and the brief respites between them. Fletcher never left her side. He wiped her face with cool water, held her hands, supported her when she wanted to walk, and consulted the medical books when he needed guidance. His hands were steady even though she could see the fear in his eyes. "You are doing so well," he kept saying. "So strong. I am so proud of you." Faye wanted to answer, but the pain stole her words. She could only grip his hands and hold on. Somewhere in the darkest part of night, Faye's water broke. The contractions immediately became more intense, and she felt an overwhelming urge to push. "Fletcher," she gasped. "Something is different." "I need to, I know," he said, having read this in the books. "When you feel the urge to push, you push. I am here. I have got you." Pushing was the hardest work Faye had ever done. It required every ounce of strength she possessed, and still the baby would not come. She could feel it moving lower with each push, but progress was agonizingly slow. "I cannot," she sobbed after what felt like the 100th push. "Fletcher, I cannot do this." "Yes, you can," Fletcher said fiercely, his face close to hers. "You are the strongest person I know. You can do this." "One more push. Come on, love. One more." Faye gathered her remaining strength and pushed with everything she had. She felt something give way, heard Fletcher's sharp intake of breath, and suddenly there was a release of pressure and Fletcher was saying, "The head is out." "Faye, I can see the baby's head." With the next contraction, Faye pushed again, and suddenly the baby slipped free in a rush. She heard Fletcher's soft exclamation, and then the most beautiful sound in the world, a thin, angry wail. "It is a girl," Fletcher said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Faye, we have a daughter." He placed the squalling infant on Faye's chest, and she looked down through tears at the tiny, perfect creature they had made. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut against the lamplight, and she was screaming with impressive lung power. "Hello, Grace," Faye whispered, running a shaking finger down her daughter's soft cheek. "Hello, my beautiful girl." Fletcher completed the necessary tasks with hands that trembled, cutting the cord, delivering the afterbirth, cleaning up. Then he climbed onto the bed beside his wife and daughter and wrapped his arms around both of them. "You did it," he said, pressing kisses to Faye's sweaty hair. "You were amazing. I have never seen anything braver in my life." "We did it," Faye corrected tiredly. "I could not have done it without you." They stayed like that until dawn, the three of them together, watching Grace sleep and marveling at the miracle of her existence. She was so small, so perfectly formed, with tiny fingers that curled around Fletcher's thumb and a rosebud mouth that pursed even in sleep. "She is perfect," Fletcher kept saying. "Absolutely perfect." Faye had never felt so exhausted or so happy. Every part of her body ached, but Grace was here and healthy and safe. They had done the impossible. The first days with a newborn were a blur of feeding and sleeping and learning. Grace was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in small stretches, but the constant demands were exhausting. Fletcher took over all the household tasks, bringing Faye food and water, changing Grace's cloths, rocking her when Faye needed rest. He was a natural father, gentle and patient with Grace in ways that made Faye fall in love with him all over again. She would wake from much-needed sleep to find him walking the floor with Grace on his shoulder, singing softly to her in his rumbling voice. Or she would catch him simply staring at Grace in her cradle, wonder written all over his face. "I cannot believe she is ours," he said one afternoon, cradling Grace in his massive hands. "I keep thinking someone is going to come and say it was all a mistake." "She is definitely ours," Faye said, smiling at the sight of her tiny daughter resting against her father's broad chest. "We made her together." As the weeks passed, they settled into a new rhythm. Faye recovered her strength slowly, and Grace began to develop her own personality, alert and curious, with a tendency to watch everything with wide, dark eyes. She clearly recognized both her parents, smiling when they spoke to her and calming at Fletcher's touch. Spring advanced into summer, and one warm June day, Fletcher announced that he was going to clean out the bathing pool for Faye. "It has been over a year since I built it," he said. "Time to put it back in working order." He spent an afternoon clearing away debris, checking the stones of the dam, and making sure the pool was clean and safe. When he was satisfied, he came to get Faye and Grace. "Come try it out," he said, his eyes warm with memory. Faye walked with him to the pool, carrying Grace in her arms. The sight of it made her heart swell. This was where it had all started, in a way where Fletcher had shown her through his actions that he loved her, that he would work to make her life better, that he was a man worth choosing. "It is as beautiful as I remember," she said. Fletcher took Grace from her arms. "Go ahead, take a bath. I will watch our daughter." Faye undressed and slipped into the cold water, sighing with pleasure. After months of quick washings and sponge baths, the luxury of immersing herself fully was incredible. She scrubbed her skin and her hair, feeling layers of exhaustion and strain wash away. When she emerged, clean and refreshed, Fletcher was sitting on the bank with Grace sleeping against his chest. He looked up at Faye with such love in his eyes that she had to stop and simply take in the moment her husband, her daughter, the pool he had built with his own hands, the mountains rising around them. "What are you thinking?" Fletcher asked softly. "I am thinking that a year ago I was alone and frightened, washing my only spare dress in this creek with no idea what would become of me," Faye said. "And now I have everything I could ever want. A home, a family, a man who loves me enough to move mountains, or at least creek stones." Fletcher stood carefully, protecting Grace's sleep, and came to kiss his wife. "You have all of that because you were brave enough to choose it, brave enough to choose me, to choose this life. I am the lucky one, Faye Sullivan." "We are both lucky," Faye said, putting her arm around him and looking down at Grace's sleeping face. "Blessed, even." Summer brought long, warm days and the full bloom of wildflowers across the meadows. Faye regained her full strength and took over more of the household duties again, though Fletcher remained an active and involved father. He could soothe Grace's cries as well as Faye could, changed her without complaint, and spent hours simply playing with her and talking to her. They began discussing the future more seriously. Fletcher's fur trapping was doing well, but with a child to raise, they needed to think about education and community. "I have been thinking," Faye said one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset, Grace sleeping in Faye's arms, "about starting a small school here. There are other families scattered through these mountains, other children who need education. I could teach them, like I was supposed to teach in my aunt's school." Fletcher considered this. "You would be good at that. But would people send their children all the way out here?" "We could offer boarding during the week for those too far to travel daily," Faye suggested. "Build a small dormitory structure. You could teach practical skills: hunting, tracking, survival. I could teach reading, writing, mathematics." "It could work. It could," Fletcher agreed slowly. "Give us a way to support ourselves beyond trapping, and Grace would have other children around as she grows." They began making plans, discussing how to build the school, how to spread word to the scattered families, what they would charge for tuition and boarding. It would take time and work, but they had both those things in abundance. As autumn approached and Grace grew into a chubby, happy 4-month-old, they received their first visitors since her birth. A family passing through on their way to Eager stopped at the cabin, and Faye was delighted to have other people to talk to. The wife, a woman named Martha with 3 children of her own, was fascinated by Grace and full of advice about child rearing. Her husband, Tom, talked with Fletcher about trapping and hunting, and the children played in the clearing while the adults visited. "You have made a good life here," Martha said, looking around the neat cabin and well-tended yard. "It cannot be easy so far from everything." "It is not easy," Faye admitted, "but it is good. We have everything we need." When the family left, Faye mentioned her school idea to Martha, who was enthusiastic. "I would absolutely send my children here for proper education. Tom and I have taught them what we can, but I have only a few books and no real training as a teacher. If you could give them real lessons, yes, I would pay for that." Fletcher and Faye looked at each other, and Faye knew they were thinking the same thing. This could really work. Over the winter, during the quiet months when Fletcher was running his trap lines and Faye was caring for Grace, they finalized their plans. In the spring, Fletcher would begin construction on a small schoolhouse and dormitory. They would send word through the territory about the school opening in the fall, and they would build something lasting, something that would benefit their entire community. Grace celebrated her first birthday on a warm April day, toddling around the cabin on unsteady legs and getting into everything. She had Fletcher's dark hair and Faye's blue eyes, and a personality that was entirely her own, determined, curious, and fearless. "She is going to be trouble," Fletcher said fondly, watching her pull herself up on the furniture and reach for things she should not have. "She is going to be wonderful," Faye corrected, "just like her father." That summer, Fletcher built the schoolhouse and dormitory with help from Tom and a few other men from the scattered homesteads. It was a simple structure but solid, with 2 main rooms for lessons, a dormitory that could sleep 10 children, and a small kitchen for preparing meals. Faye sent letters to families throughout the region, and by autumn, she had 12 students enrolled, children ranging from age 6 to 14, some boarding during the week, others making the daily journey from nearby homesteads. The first day of school was chaotic but wonderful. Faye taught reading and writing and arithmetic, while Fletcher came in the afternoons to teach practical skills. The children were hungry for knowledge, and Faye found teaching even more rewarding than she had imagined. Grace, now 18 months old, toddled around the schoolhouse getting adored by the older children, who treated her like a mascot. She was learning words quickly and had recently started calling Fletcher Papa and Faye Mama. which reduced them both to sentimental messes every time. As the years passed, the school flourished. More families sent their children, and Faye gained a reputation as an excellent teacher. Fletcher continued his trapping but also began guiding hunting parties in the autumn, bringing in additional income. They expanded the cabin, adding more rooms as their family grew, because Grace was not their only child for long. 2 years after Grace came a son, Frank, named for Fletcher's father. He was as dark and sturdy as Fletcher himself, and Fletcher doted on his son, teaching him everything about mountain life from the time he could walk. Then came another daughter, Clara, delicate and sweet-natured, followed by another son, James, who was quiet and thoughtful. Each child was welcomed with joy, each birth bringing Fletcher and Faye closer together. Grace grew into a bright, capable girl who helped her mother teach the younger students and her father with outdoor work. Frank showed a natural talent for tracking and hunting that made Fletcher burst with pride. Clara loved books and flowers and spent hours reading or tending the small garden. James was still young, but already showed signs of inheriting his father's quiet strength and his mother's intelligence. 10 years after Fletcher had first pulled stones from the creek to build Faye a bathing pool, they stood together on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching their 4 children play in the clearing while students from the school worked on evening lessons in the schoolhouse. "Do you ever regret it?" Fletcher asked, his arm around Faye's shoulders. "Giving up your aunt's school in California for this life?" Faye looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Regret choosing you, regret our children, our school, our home." "Fletcher Sullivan, how could I possibly regret the best decision I ever made?" "Just checking," Fletcher said, but he was smiling. "I have everything I ever wanted and more than I knew to dream of," Faye said firmly. "A husband I love more every day, beautiful children, work that matters. A community of people we care about. This is not the life I planned, but it is so much better than anything I could have planned." Fletcher pulled her close and kissed her temple. "Same for me. Finding you in that creek was the luckiest day of my life." "You mean scaring me half to death by emerging from the forest like a bear?" Faye teased. "I am glad I scared you," Fletcher said. "Otherwise you might have run away before I could fall in love with you." Grace came running up to the porch at that moment, her dark braids flying. "Mama, Papa, Frank said he saw a deer track by the schoolhouse. Can we go look?" "After supper," Fletcher said. "And only if you all finish your chores first." Grace nodded and ran back to her siblings, already organizing them into a chore completion team. Faye shook her head fondly. "She is going to run this whole place someday," she said. "She already does," Fletcher replied. "Wonder where she gets that from." They stood together in the golden evening light, comfortable in the silence that came from knowing each other completely. The bathing pool still stood behind the cabin, maintained and used regularly, a constant reminder of the simple act of love that had started everything. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Faye to the pool at sunset. The children were being watched by Martha, whose own children had long since finished at the school but who remained close friends with the Sullivan family. "I wanted to bring you here," Fletcher said as they stood beside the water, "where it all began, you building me a bathing pool." Faye asked, smiling. "Me realizing I was in love with you and deciding to do something about it," Fletcher corrected. "I stood in this creek for 4 days, moving stones, thinking about you, about how you made the cabin feel like home, about how much I wanted you to stay, about how I could show you that choosing me, choosing this life, would not mean giving up comfort or care. You showed me that and so much more," Faye said, taking his hands. "You showed me what real love looks like, not pretty words or grand gestures, but daily choice and steady commitment. You showed me that strength and gentleness are not opposites, that a man can be powerful and kind at once. You gave me everything, Fletcher. You gave me everything too, Fletcher said. A reason to hope again. A family. A purpose beyond simple survival. You made me want to build instead of just endure. They kissed beside the pool as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. 15 years of marriage, 4 children, countless challenges overcome together. And still every kiss felt like the first one, precious, promising, full of love. When they returned to the cabin, the children were waiting with a surprise. They had baked a cake with Martha's help and made cards decorated with flowers and drawings. Grace had written a poem about her parents that made Faye cry. Frank had carved them each a small wooden heart. Clara had picked wildflowers and woven them into crowns. Even little James had contributed, making handprints in paint on paper. We wanted to celebrate, Grace explained, standing tall at 11 years old and so much like Faye in her determination. Because you are the best parents and we love you. Fletcher pulled all 4 children into his arms and Faye joined the embrace, creating a tangle of family that was loud and chaotic and absolutely perfect. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Faye and Fletcher lay together in their bed, speaking softly. I have been thinking about something, Faye said. Do you remember my aunt in California? I have been writing to her all these years, but I have never visited her, never let her meet you or the children. Are you wanting to make the trip? Fletcher asked. I think so, Faye said. Maybe next summer when school is out. I would like her to see what we have built here. Meet the man I chose over her teaching position. See her great nieces and nephews. Then we will go, Fletcher said simply. All of us. Make a real trip of it. The children would love seeing California. They made the journey the following summer, traveling by stage and train with 4 excited children. Faye's aunt was an older woman now, but still sharp and energetic, running her school with efficient dedication. When she met Fletcher for the first time, she looked him up and down, all 6 feet of muscled mountain man in his best clothes, and said, "So this is the man who stole my niece away." "I did not steal her," Fletcher said mildly. "She chose me." Faye's aunt laughed. "So she did. And looking at you and these beautiful children, I cannot say she chose wrong. Come, let me show you what you gave up, Faye." She gave them a tour of the school, introduced them to her teachers and students, showed them her well-appointed house. It was all very nice, very proper, very civilized. And Faye felt not even a flicker of regret. "It is a good school," she told her aunt honestly. "You should be proud of what you have built." "I am," her aunt said, "but I think perhaps you have built something even better. A school in the wilderness, bringing education to children who would not have it otherwise. A strong family. A good life. I worried about you when the stage company told me you never arrived. I was terrified for you. But you landed on your feet, did you not?" "I did," Faye said, looking at Fletcher playing with their children in the yard. "Better than I ever could have planned." They returned to Arizona after 2 weeks, and the children talked about the trip for months. But Faye noticed that even Grace, who had been most excited about seeing a city, was happy to be home in the mountains. "California was nice," Grace said as she helped Faye prepare for the new school year. "But I like our home better. It is quieter and prettier, and I missed my bathing pool." Faye laughed. Grace had claimed the pool as her own special place, using it daily in summer and treating it like a sacred spot. "Your father built that pool for me, you know. He built it for love," Grace said wisely. "That is what Papa told me. He said he built it because he loved you and wanted you to be happy and comfortable, and that is why he does everything." Faye hugged her daughter close, marveling at her insight. "Your father is a very good man." "I know," Grace said. "When I grow up, I want to marry someone like him." someone strong and kind who builds things out of love. As the children grew older, the school continued to thrive. Grace eventually became a teacher there herself, working alongside her mother. Frank began guiding hunting parties with Fletcher, developing a reputation for tracking skills that rivaled his father's. Clara married one of the students who had attended the school years before, a gentle man who shared her love of books and gardens. James showed interest in medicine and began studying the medical texts Fletcher had saved all those years ago, planning to become the doctor the region so desperately needed. Fletcher and Faye aged together, their dark hair silvering, their hands becoming work-worn and weathered. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared trials and joys, by children raised and challenges overcome, by a life built together one stone at a time. On their 30th anniversary, Fletcher took Faye to the bathing pool once again. He had rebuilt parts of the stone dam over the years, maintaining it carefully so it remained as functional as the day he first constructed it. 30 years, he said, standing with Faye at the water's edge. More than half my life spent loving you. The best years of my life, Faye said, leaning into his solid warmth. Every single one of them. Do you remember what I said when I started building this? Fletcher asked. You said you were building me something, Faye recalled. A private bathing pool so I would be safe and comfortable. I said more than that, Fletcher said. I said you deserve to feel safe and comfortable, and I meant it. You deserved that then, and you deserve it now, and I will spend whatever time I have left making sure you have it. You have given me 30 years of safety and comfort, Faye said, turning to face him. 30 years of love and partnership and joy. You have given me 4 incredible children and a life beyond my wildest dreams. You have given me everything, Fletcher Sullivan. Then we are even, Fletcher said, cupping her face in his large, gentle hands. Because you have given me exactly the same. They kissed beside the pool, beside the stack of stones Fletcher had placed with his own hands all those decades ago. And Faye thought about how a simple act of thoughtfulness and love could change the course of a life. She had come to these mountains lost and alone, with nothing but a trunk of belongings and a ticket to a life that never materialized. And she had found instead a mountain man with strong hands and a gentle heart, who had looked at her and seen someone worth building something for. He had dammed the creek with stones to make her a bathing pool, and in doing so, he had built them both a life. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons in the mountains. Grandchildren arrived, filling the expanded cabin and schoolhouse with new laughter and energy. Grace had 3 children of her own, Frank had 4, Clara had 2, and James, who eventually married a woman he met while studying medicine in Tucson, had 1. Fletcher and Faye became the patriarch and matriarch of a growing family, their cabin the gathering place for holidays and celebrations. The school that Faye had founded continued under Grace's direction, now teaching a second generation of mountain children. On their 40th anniversary, their children and grandchildren organized a celebration. The whole community came: former students, neighbors from scattered homesteads, families whose lives had been touched by the school or Fletcher's guidance or simply by the example of a strong, loving marriage. There was food and music and stories. Fletcher, now in his late 60s but still strong and vital, danced with Faye while their grandchildren watched with delight. Grace gave a speech about her parents that had everyone crying. Frank presented them with a hand-carved bench he had made for them to sit on by the bathing pool. Because that is where it all started, Frank said. Papa building something out of love for Mama, teaching all of us what really matters. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Faye and Fletcher sat on their new bench by the pool, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Their hands were intertwined, fingers gnarled with age but grip still strong. 40 years, Faye marveled. It seems impossible that so much time has passed. Best 40 years of my life, Fletcher said, echoing their old refrain. Mine too, Faye agreed. Every single day. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the eternal rush of water over stones, the sound that had been the backdrop to their entire life together. The pool Fletcher had built still stood, still functioned, a testament to the care and skill he had put into its construction all those years ago. Thank you, Faye said softly, for building this for me, for building a life with me, for every day and every choice and every moment of love. Fletcher raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Thank you for choosing me, for seeing past the rough mountain man to the heart underneath. For making me want to be better, to build instead of just survive, for giving me a family and a purpose and more happiness than any one person deserves. We both deserve it, Faye said firmly. We worked for it. We built it together, one stone at a time. And as they sat together in the twilight, beside the bathing pool that had started everything, surrounded by the life they had created through love and determination and unwavering commitment to each other, Faye and Fletcher knew that they had found something precious and rare. They had found home. They had found family. They had found love that lasted, and it all began with a mountain man who cared enough to dam a creek with stones.